Rain hammered the pavement like 1,000 tiny fists, cold and relentless. My heels sank into the mud beside the manicured hedges of the Greenmoor Country Club, but I barely noticed. In my right hand, I clutched my coat. In my left, the engagement ring that had once felt like the key to my happily ever after. I could still hear the echo of laughter from inside, high-pitched, polite, the kind people use when they don't know whether to laugh or choke. My name was probably still being passed around the room like a cocktail napkin, each person adding their own spin to why the bride-to-be had just stormed out before dessert. They mocked my dead mother. That's all you need to know. That's all that matters. But of course, there's more to it. There always is. Just 2 hours earlier, I was seated at a candlelit table under a ceiling of crystal chandeliers, pretending to enjoy the scent of roasted duck and vintage wine. My fiancé, Ethan Carter, was giving a charming speech about how lucky he was to have found me. I smiled at the right times, laughed at the right times, even reached for his hand when he told a cute story about our first date. If you were there, you'd have thought we were perfect. You wouldn't have seen the subtle digs I'd been dodging for years. You wouldn't have noticed the way his mother's eyes flicked to my thrift store shoes the first time we met. Or the way his father once told me, "You're doing well for someone from Havenbrook," as if my hometown was a pit you had to climb out of to matter. Still, I stayed. Because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You ignore the cracks. You patch them with hope. You tell yourself the wedding will change everything. But in the end, the wedding didn't change anything. It ended before it began. I stood outside that night, rain seeping through my dress, makeup streaking down my cheeks, the diamond ring heavy in my palm. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that this wasn't a tragedy, it was an escape. And maybe, if you hear the whole story, you'll agree. I first saw Ethan Carter in the crowded lecture hall of Briarwood University during a student debate on climate policy. He wasn't on stage, he was leaning against the back wall, sleeves rolled up, a half smile playing on his lips like he already knew the outcome of the argument. I was there covering the event for the campus newspaper, typing away, when I caught him watching me instead of the speakers. Afterward, he walked right up, introduced himself, and asked me if I wanted to grab coffee. No cheesy pickup lines, no awkward fumbling, just confidence. It was the kind of thing you don't forget. Our first coffee turned into 4 hours of conversation. We compared childhood stories, mine filled with small-town quirks, his sprinkled with tales of summer homes and boarding schools. The differences didn't feel like walls back then. They felt like something we could learn from each other. Ethan had a way of making me feel like the only person in the room. Late-night phone calls, study sessions that turned into movie marathons, rainy walks under one umbrella, all the cliché things people roll their eyes at but secretly wish they had. The first time I met his parents, Richard and Evelyn Carter, I was nervous but hopeful. They lived in Maplehurst, in a sprawling colonial home with a wrought iron gate. Evelyn greeted me with a perfectly arched eyebrow and a comment about my interesting choice of shoes. Richard shook my hand firmly, then said, "So, you're Sophie, from Havenbrook." The way he said my hometown made it sound like a far-off village in need of charity. I laughed it off. I told myself they were just formal, that they'd warm up once they got to know me. Ethan brushed off my discomfort, saying, "You're overthinking it. They like you." My mom just has a dry sense of humor. It became a pattern. Every time something felt off, Ethan had a way of smoothing it over with a smile and a shrug. And because I loved him, or maybe because I needed to believe love could conquer anything, I let it go. Looking back now, those moments weren't harmless quirks. They were warning signs. But at the time, I couldn't see the storm building. I only saw Ethan and the life I thought we were building together. Winning over the Carters became a mission I didn't remember signing up for. It wasn't enough to be polite and pleasant. With them, you had to be impressive. I started showing up at their family dinners in carefully chosen outfits, the kind that looked expensive but didn't scream. I maxed out my credit card for this. Evelyn would still give me her slow, appraising once over before pursing her lips in what I hoped was approval. When Richard's business, a boutique investment firm, hit a slow patch, I mentioned a client from my marketing job who might be interested in working with him. That introduction turned into a contract worth 6 figures. Richard sent me a thank you email, short, polite, and as warm as a tax form. Then came Evelyn's wine crisis. A month before the wedding, she called me in a hushed voice, explaining that the vintage she had to have for the reception was beyond their current, liquid budget because of investments. I offered to cover the cost. It was nearly a month's rent for me, but I told myself it would by goodwill. When I told Ethan, he didn't even say thank you. "You know how they are," he said. "Just let it go." Still, I kept trying. I attended Carter charity galas where I knew no one, smiling until my cheeks hurt. I learned the names of Evelyn's friends, laughed at Richard's long-winded stories about golf trips, and even bought Evelyn an antique tea set after she offhandedly mentioned admiring one. But the more I tried, the more it felt like I was climbing a rope that kept getting pulled higher. One night, at a Carter family barbecue, Richard introduced me to an old friend of his as Ethan's fiancé, from the other side of town. His tone wasn't friendly, it was the kind of thing people say when they're explaining a rescue mission. The man smiled politely, but I felt the sting. When I brought it up to Ethan later, he sighed. "Babe, you're being too sensitive. My dad's old school. He doesn't mean anything by it." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was sensitive. But deep down, a small, insistent voice kept whispering that no matter what I did, I'd never be enough for them. I silenced that voice. Because the alternative, facing the truth, felt too heavy to carry. From the very start, the wedding felt less like our celebration and more like a Carter family production. My dream was simple, a small lakeside ceremony at Havenbrook Park, under the willow trees where my mom used to take me on summer evenings. It would have been intimate, 30, maybe 40 guests, with fairy lights strung between the branches and a live acoustic band. Evelyn smiled when I told her. Then she slid a glossy brochure across the table for a 200-guest ballroom gala at the Greenmoor Country Club, complete with ice sculptures and a 10-piece orchestra. "I just think," she said sweetly, "that Ethan deserves something worthy of the Carter name." "This park idea of yours is cute, though." I glanced at Ethan, waiting for him to speak up. He didn't. He just said, "Babe, the ballroom would be easier to plan. And my mom's already a member at Greenmoor." That set the tone. The guest list ballooned from 40 to 200. Evelyn insisted on inviting half of Maplehurst's political elite. My side of the aisle began to look like a sparse afterthought. I wanted my best friend Lila as maid of honor. Evelyn suggested her goddaughter, Harper, who I'd met exactly once, because she photographs beautifully. Ethan said it would mean a lot to his mom. Even my dress wasn't safe. I had chosen a simple ivory gown with lace sleeves, something timeless. Evelyn wrinkled her nose and suggested a strapless couture piece to flatter my shoulders. The only problem? It cost more than my car. When I mentioned wearing my late mother's locket down the aisle, Evelyn smiled tightly and said, "Of course, though it might clash with the Cartier necklace we've planned for you. We can keep the locket in your bouquet close, but discreet." It was like death by 1,000 paper cuts. I would compromise on one thing, then another, until the wedding I had imagined was almost unrecognizable. At night, I would lie in bed next to Ethan, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the version of me they wanted to present to the world even existed. And every time I thought about pushing back, Ethan would take my hand and say, "It's just one day, Sophie. Don't make it a big deal." But it didn't feel like just one day. It felt like the rest of my life. The week before the wedding felt like a slow, suffocating countdown. First came the bridal shower. Evelyn hosted it at her friend's lakefront estate, complete with crystal champagne flutes and pastel macarons. I wore a pale blue dress I'd saved up for, hoping it would please her. During her toast, Evelyn tapped her glass and smiled at the crowd of women. "We are so lucky to welcome Sophie into our family," she began. "She's brought so much energy. And, well, I think we can all agree she's marrying into a situation that will give her the stability she's always deserved." The room chuckled lightly. I smiled tightly, but my insides twisted. I caught Lila's eye across the room. She was glaring at Evelyn like she might throw a macaron at her head. Then came the dress fitting. I'd lost a few pounds from stress, so the seamstress was adjusting the waist. Evelyn stood in the corner, sipping tea, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. She murmured, "The cut is forgiving. That's good for photographs." The seamstress paused mid-pin, looking at me for a reaction. I just smiled, as if I hadn't heard. At dinner that night, I vented to my dad. He's a quiet man, not one for drama, but he set down his fork and said, "Honey, are you sure this is what you want?" I brushed it off. "It's just pre-wedding stress. I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. Even Ethan seemed distant. We'd sit together, but his phone would buzz constantly with messages from his parents about floral arrangements or seating charts. When I told him I was feeling overwhelmed, he said, "This is how weddings are. It'll be worth it." The night before the rehearsal dinner, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Every compromise I'd made replayed in my head like a film reel. The venue, the dress, the guest list, even the wine I'd paid for. Somewhere inside me, a quiet truth was taking shape, that this wasn't just about the wedding. This was about my place in their world. And no matter how hard I tried, I might never be truly accepted. But the next day, I told myself, was a chance to change things. Maybe the rehearsal dinner could be a fresh start. I had no idea it would be the final straw. At that day, the Greenmoor Country Club glowed like a palace that night, marble floors polished to a mirror shine, chandeliers dripping crystals, waiters gliding between tables like clockwork. To everyone else, it was a glamorous evening. To me, it felt like walking into enemy territory. Ethan's side of the room was overflowing, a sea of tailored suits, glittering gowns, and people whose names I'd never remember. My side? My dad, Lila, my cousin Jenna, and a few old friends from Havenbrook who looked as out of place as I felt. From the moment I arrived, the small humiliations started. Evelyn commented, just loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "Oh, Sophie, your dress is very brave. Not everyone can pull off that color." Richard corrected my pronunciation of hors d'oeuvres as I spoke to a waiter. Ethan was too busy working the room, laughing with business partners, to notice. We made it through dinner, the silver clinking of cutlery filling the silence between forced smiles. Then Ethan stood to make his speech. It was sweet, charming, and carefully polished, the kind of speech that made everyone smile and clap. I almost let myself relax. But then Richard and Evelyn rose, champagne flutes in hand. To Sophie and Ethan, Richard began, his grin wide but cold. "We're so thrilled to welcome such a unique young woman into our family." A ripple of polite laughter moved through the room. My cheeks burned. Evelyn's turn. She held her glass high. "It's been quite an adventure getting to know Sophie. She's spirited. Keeps us on our toes." Another round of laughter, sharper this time. I kept my eyes on the tablecloth, willing it to end. But Evelyn wasn't done. She looked straight at me, lips curling into a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "And it's good she's marrying up. Maybe now she can finally relax and stop working so hard." She paused, then added softly, "Her dear mother, God rest her soul, would be so proud Sophie's finally found stability." The room laughed. It felt like someone had punched the air out of my lungs. My mother, who had worked 3 jobs to keep me in school, was now the punchline at my rehearsal dinner. I turned to Ethan, my voice a whisper. "Did you hear that? Are you going to say something?" He glanced at his parents, then at me. "Sophie, don't make a scene." The silence between us stretched, heavy and deafening, while the polite laughter around the table faded into the clinking of glasses. My pulse roared in my ears. Ethan's words replayed over and over, each time twisting the knife deeper. My fiancé, the man I thought would stand beside me for life, couldn't even stand beside me for 60 seconds. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the polished floor, the sound slicing through the chatter. Conversations paused. Heads turned. I stood, my hands trembling, but my voice steady. You think this is a joke? I looked straight at Richard and Evelyn. My mother was the strongest woman I've ever known. She worked herself to the bone so I could have a future, so I could be here tonight. And you, all of you, think that's entertainment. Gasps rippled through the room. Richard's smile faltered. Evelyn froze, her glass halfway to her lips. I turned to Ethan. If you can't defend me now when I need you most, then you never will. For a heartbeat, I waited, almost hoping he'd stand up, say something, do something. But he just sat there, eyes darting between me and his parents, jaw tight with embarrassment. That was my answer. I reached for my left hand, sliding off the engagement ring that had once symbolized forever. I placed it gently on the linen tablecloth in front of him. It looked absurdly small there, surrounded by crystal stemware and gold-plated cutlery. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the door. My heels echoed across the marble floor, each step louder than the last. Behind me, I heard murmurs, some shocked, some disapproving, others whispering like they'd just witnessed the plot twist of the year. Just before I reached the exit, Richard's voice called out, "Sophie, wait." I didn't turn around. "You've taken enough from me," I said, my voice carrying just enough to be heard, then pushed open the heavy oak doors. The cool night air hit me like freedom. Rain pelted my skin, soaking my dress, smudging my makeup. I didn't care. Lila came running after me, draping my coat over my shoulders. "Come on," she said softly, "let's get you out of here." Lila drove me back to my apartment in silence. The windshield wipers swished back and forth, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. I stared out at the blurred city lights, still half expecting my phone to buzz with a message from Ethan that would somehow undo everything. It did buzz, twice, but the words on the screen only confirmed what I already knew. "Ethan, you overreacted. Ethan, we can talk tomorrow. Let's not throw everything away over a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. That's what he called it. By morning, there were more messages. One from Evelyn, so carefully worded it could have been drafted by a lawyer. "We are disappointed with how you handled last night. Considering the expenses we have incurred, we expect a conversation about reimbursing certain costs." I didn't reply. I didn't owe them a conversation. Or a penny. Instead, I called my dad. He didn't say "I told you so." He just said, "I'm proud of you, kiddo." And somehow, that meant more than any apology Ethan could ever offer. Over the next few days, the fallout trickled in. Jenna texted me a screenshot of a Facebook thread where some of the Carter relatives speculated about whether I had cold feet or if there was another man. My coworkers, who had been counting down to the big day, were stunned when I told them there wouldn't be one. Ethan tried calling twice more. I let it go to voicemail both times. The second message was angrier. "I don't know who you think you are, Sophie. You embarrassed me." That was when I realized this wasn't about one night. It wasn't even about his parents. It was about Ethan. About the way he always expected me to adapt, to smooth things over, to swallow the hurt for the sake of appearances. And about how I'd been doing exactly that for 7 years. So I started packing. Not just my apartment, my life here. I'd been meaning to take the out-of-state job offer I'd received months ago. Now I had nothing tying me down. On my last night in Havenbrook, I walked to the park where I'd once imagined saying my vows. The willow trees swayed in the wind, rain misting lightly over the lake. I thought of my mom. "I'm okay," I whispered. And for the first time in years, I meant it. Because I hadn't lost a fiancé. I'd found myself.